Well, I farm in the Fens, somewhere about where the D of the Welland is. And we are pretty flat. We're not below sea level. The sort of purple areas are areas that are below sea level. Well, gone are the days when the Fens were grassland and the water table was pretty high and we had windmills to take the water away. We've drained the Fens, quite literally. First of all, it was by a spade and sweat, and this was taken in 1910. Well, you could say an army of men, and that's what it needed in those days. There were no drag lines or 360-degree machines. So in a dry winter, they would be doing the drains out. But today, of course, there's no sweat and there's no spade and no sweat. It's just done mechanically. And a bit too efficient, really, because there aren't many eels left. And it's a sad state of affairs, really, the eel situation. Then, of course, when we put pipes under the soil, that was done by spade and sweat as well. But now we can do it. Now we have grading machines. We can do it without any spades or without any sweat. And in fact, all this is made so much easier because of the combustion engine. And in fact, we fell in love with a combustion engine. But the problem is every car is a fly swatter and every lorry is a fly swatter. And they just don't swat flies, they swat birds as well. And that's a dead barn owl on the side of Spalding Bypass. But it's not only on the main roads that this happens, it also happens on the side roads. And this goldfinch was feeding on the dandelion seeds on the left-hand side of the road. Along came a car, frightened it, and it was soon dead on the road. Well, in the late 70s and early 80s, I was doing bird surveys for the BTO and for the Lincolnshire Bird Club, but none of those surveys were on my farm. And I thought I ought to do a survey on my farm, so I went down the farm with a map and pen and binoculars and saw and recorded everything I saw and heard. The scale of this map is that the squares on it are 1 kilometre squares, as on every other Ordnance Survey map. I've simplified the results and I've just looked at skylarks and corn buntings. And there's over 30 pairs of skylarks there and 12 singing corn buntings. And all the corn buntings are in reach of winter barley, except this one near the potatoes there. Where they nest near to winter barley, they have a bit bigger brood and they nest a bit earlier as well. But we've stopped growing winter barley. It doesn't pay us too much, so we grow more wheat instead of winter barley. I didn't do much with those records for several years, but then in 1992, I started to work out what the difference was. And there's only 1 singing corn bunting and 14 singing skylarks. And we've got more block cropping, as you can see. Incidentally, my farm is just the middle one of these 3. But if I walk down one side to the far end, set off about 5:05, get down to here, cut across there and back, and I can be back in the yard for 7 o'clock to set the men on. So what had been happening in that time? Well, in the 1960s, we only sprayed our wheat crops with 1 herbicide and sometimes an insecticide. But in the 1970s and 80s, the agrochemical industry got itself into top gear. And by the 1990s, we were spraying our wheat crops with 3 herbicides, 2 growth regulators, 2 insecticides, and 3 fungicides. Well, the growth regulators are to stop the wheat growing too tall. And being as it doesn't grow as tall as it would like, it stiffens the straw. Then we can put more nitrogen on. And then we get a thicker crop, and then we get trouble with a thick crop because we get foliar diseases in it, and such as rust and septoria and mildew, and then we have to spray insecticides. So that's really why we apply all these sprays. And when we sprayed with just one herbicide in 1960 to kill the weeds, well, there was always weeds in the bottom of the crop. We never got rid of them all. But when we spraying 3 herbicides, there were no weeds in the crop. And so our birds started declining. Well, all this is worried me, this lack of birds. And so I started to look at other reasons, what might be happening. And in 1955, that's the same map, Vinehouse Farm is up the middle here. And every orange dot on that map is a pig yard or a cattle yard. But farming is specialized, and those cattle and pig yards have gone. That was a cattle yard with Lincoln red cattle in there. And there's food, where we feed animals, we feed birds. There's a few grains of wheat on the top of the bales. There's bits in the manger that the cattle couldn't get out, and starlings could probe about in the cow dung. There was always plenty of food around. But those cattle yards have gone. And where's my cursor? And so have the swallows. Swallows were declined by 90% in the last 60 or 70 years in our area. And farmers actually are persuaded to kill the flies on their farm if they have cattle. Dose monthly to make sure you keep killing newly emerged flies. Repeat the spot treatment every 4 weeks. In fact, nearly everybody is at war with insects. They buzz, they itch, and they might sting. So, to the average person, why the hell do we want them? But of course, they are the basis of all life. Without insects, we wouldn't be here today. That's how it is, yeah. And then we get to 2015. Well, there's no cattle yards, and look at all the dikes that have been filled in. This field here, is 100 acre. This one's 200 acres, and this one's 200 acres. Yes, so, and for this farmer, really, no field's too big for him, and it's a pity, really. He's just bulldozing wildlife away as he keeps taking more land. But well, this lack of birds worried me, and so we started feeding the birds in the farmyard. And in this yard, we were feeding oilseed rape, and we had a couple of acres of set-aside wheat. And we were getting up to 800 birds in the yard at one time. And I thought it was a spectacle. I thought other people might like to see this spectacle. So we advertised for an open day, and it cost me £58, I remember, to put an advert in the paper. And we got about 60 or 70 people that came. We didn't charge them anything, but we had a collection box. And 2 or 3 people asked me if I could sell them any birdseed. Oh, I said I hadn't thought about that one. But anyway, I did. I sold them some oilseed rape at the time. And then we gave all the proceeds to the Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust for the proceeds of the day. And then the next year we had the same spectacle. So we had another open day. And again, people asked me to sell them birdseed. So there I was selling bird food without even trying. Well, we've tried a bit harder since, of course, but that winter my wife and I went to Argentina, and farming and bird watching, as we do on every holiday. And my wife saw some rogue sunflowers in a soya bean field, and she took a fancy to them because they had several heads on them. And so I was dispatched through the fence to collect a couple of heads of these sunflowers. And we brought them home, and sowed them in the garden. But I was gobsmacked by the amount of birds there were on the farms in Argentina. They had 4 years grass with cattle on the grass, and then they had 4 years arable. Then 4 years grass and 4 years arable. The soil was obviously alive with insects, and the birds were there to eat them. But when I returned in 2009, there were no birds. They were GM farming. We stayed at the same two farms, and the second farm, they had the Monsanto scientists on the farm, and one of them said to me, he said, boy, he says, we're altering the environment here. Oh, I said, what do you mean by that? Well, he said, we're driving wildlife away. And they were GM cropping. And so GM cropping in this country will just hasten the decline of wildlife, as I see it anyway. So we grew these sunflowers in the garden, and that autumn, the garden was alive with birds. We saved some more seed and sowed them the next spring. And again, in the autumn, the garden was alive with birds. And so I said to my wife, we don't want to be selling people oil seed rape. We want to be growing and selling sunflowers. And that's what we've done ever since. But, well, we have farm walks as well. These people came from Downing Street. The lady in white, she brought them all. Whether they came to see why the birds were declining, what we could do about it, and whether farmers should get paid for doing something about it. But whether it made any difference, of course, I've no idea. So that's, we still have farm walks, of course. And of course, we are growing a variety of seeds. That's canary seed. We grow red millet, white millet, and naked oats, and of course, wheat. And but sunflowers are the best food for birds. They're rich in protein and rich in oil. They all look very pretty, of course, when they're in flower, but come harvest time, they don't look half as good. And that's the combine harvesting. Well, another thing we decided to do was to farm organically. What the birds need, the insects. Birds need insects to feed their young. They can't take them water, so the water has to be included in the food that they take to their youngsters. And that moist food is insects. Well, here we are. So the only way I could think of farming with weeds in my crops was to farm organically. And, people haven't got that sort of attitude around here. They're all, want to get the most out of the land, and, they're a long way off organic farming, But anyway, my nearest organic farm is 15 miles away. Anyway, in 1998, we started organic farming. And in one of the corners of the field, there were 3 species of butterflies. And this is the ringlet. There was the small tortoiseshell and a large white. I took a photograph of each one, and in each one there are other insects, like this one up here and this other one to the left there. And if that had been a conventional crop, those insects just wouldn't have been there. Well, another thing, apart from what our sprays do, it's what our machines do. This machine is preparing land for potatoes. Now, all the insects on our farm, they've got to winter somewhere, and a lot of them winter in the soil, either as a larvae or as an egg. And this machine has some blades underneath, which are turning pretty fast, and they're turning so fast that they will be breaking insect eggs and breaking and killing larvae. So that's not good for the situation. So we've been looking into this soil situation, how to care for the soil. Well, we used to see lots of millipedes in the soil, but we hardly see any now. That's just one of the ones that have declined. And then, well, with no insects in the soil, how's the lapwing going to feed? There's not very many insects in the soil nowadays, unless you do something about it. Well, we drill oil radish. Oil radish is a crop that stops the soil blowing if it was light enough to blow. It stops water running off the field if it gets a wet time. It captures the nitrogen in the soil, and it has a good taproot, which it puts down and makes a drainage hole. So straight after harvest, we direct drill this in a number of crops. This was drilled in peas, and we sprayed it off with Roundup about 2 days before this photograph was taken. And then we drill into it winter wheat. And on every field we've done that, we have more birds on those fields than those that we haven't treated like this. They are after they're after the insects, a lot of them. The insects are coming up to feed on the trash of the oil radish, coming up onto the surface at night mainly, but sometimes in the daytime. And so we do that after peas, and we do it after oilseed rape. We also drill this after wheat, and then the oil radish overwinters, and the next spring it dies off, and we direct drill the next crop, either barley, spring barley, millet, or peas. And on every field we've done that, we've had lapwings nesting. And there, of course, is a lapwing. Yes, and it's the only thing I've known in my time of farming that's been good for wildlife. Every other new idea created that's good for farming is normally, well, nearly every time, is bad for wildlife. So it's really heartening, and it doubles the amount of skylarks on the field, and there's corn buntings come feeding on it, and hares on it. Yes, it's a wonderful habitat, seems to be a wonderful habitat for wildlife. So what's happening, you see, well, if we ploughed the land, we kill about 50% of the worms. Well, I say we kill. 50% get killed. The seagulls get some, of course. But if we direct drill, the worms continue to increase in numbers. And by the time next spring has come, there's more of them, and they come up to the surface at night to eat on the trash of 2 crops which are on the surface. And that's the lapwings have got big eyes, they feed at night, and they have a successful brood quite often. So, as I say, it's the only good thing in farming that I've known in the last 55 years. Well, that was my farm in 1955. Every building was devoted to cattle, except the black one in the bottom left-hand corner, and that was the machinery shed. Well, there's some Lincoln red cattle in the top corner because that's a grass field. There's 2 lorries there shoveling soil off, and there's a hen hut with some chickens outside it. But of course, things have altered. Where's my cursor? Here we are. Yeah. But then, of course, we were still using the horse and the binder, but that gradually gave away to the combine. But anyway, there we are. Those sheaves had to be carted to the stack, and there were 7 of us there to feed the sheaves into the drum. There was somebody under the drum clearing the bits and pieces away, and there's somebody taking the corn off, the sacks of corn off this end of the drum, somebody looking after the tractor. There were 7 of us, and at best we could get 1.5 tons of wheat thrashed in an hour. But when the combine came about, well, it only needed about 3 people to do 1.5 tons per hour. But the combines have moved on, and now they are, this one here is hour in, hour out, it would get 70 or 80 tons an hour thrashed. And every year they improve them a little bit, and they are amazing bits of kit. There's no doubt about that. Well, at first we stored wheat in open fronted sheds, and sparrows got in and had a good time. And then somebody decided that we didn't ought to be having sparrow droppings in our bread, and so we were made to shut the corn stores up and keep the vermin out. Sparrows were classed as vermin in those days, and that was a food source that disappeared as far as the sparrows were concerned. Well, this is another early photograph I took. It was my job to lead the horse and cart to the potato grave where the potatoes were stored. But I never did get on very well with horses, so I swapped jobs with the chap on the right there with the black hair. He was on piecework, and he paid me 10 bob to pick my row, his row all afternoon. I thought that was quite a good deal, actually, because my dad was only paying me £6.9 a week. Admittedly, I had free lodgings, but that was the situation. And the potatoes were taken to the potato grave, which is a long heap of potatoes covered by straw and then by soil. Suffolk punch horses. Then later in the year, or the next spring, the potatoes were riddled out. And, there's a few rotten potatoes there on the ground. There's a few mouldy grains of wheat in the wheat straw. And there's food for wildlife. And when the gang went home, the wildlife moved in. And there was potato graves, on every farm in our area, different parts of every farm. So the birds didn't have to go too far to get another meal. But today it's 4-row potato harvesters, and it's all stored behind asbestos and steel. That is my farmyard now, and all our crops grow. They grow well if they get a lot of sunshine. But technology's moved on, and now we can get a crop off our roofs, of course, with solar panels, which is all very good. And we have quite a lot of renewable energy. We have these 3 turbines on the farm, 2,000 megawatts each. 2 megawatts each. And when these last few days, they've been capable of boiling 1,000 kettles at any one time. So they've been producing a lot of electricity lately. The electricity from them goes underground to the nearest town, which is Spalding. There's a substation there. And while they were laying that cable underground, they laid one in the same trench for us, for the village. And I think those overhead cables, which have now been taken down, killed more birds than what the turbines did. And I think the road through Dibbon St Nicholas, quite a long road, kills a bird a day. So, far more than what the turbines do. The little silver chimney there in the center of the photograph burns waste oil below it. And we there's no black smoke from it. It's a proper waste oil burner, and we would have, if we didn't do that, we'd have to pay 10p a litre to get our waste oil carted away. So that's a real saving. And the building nearest to us, it is heated by the waste heat from our potato refrigerated store. Out of the back of your fridge comes a little bit of heat. And when you have a 1,000-ton potato store, well, you've got a lot of heat coming out of there. So it heats that nearest building to us. We have a biomass boiler that heats the offices, the museums, my daughter's cake studio, and my house. And yes, it all seems to work very well. Sugar beet, well, sugar beet's gone much the same way as other crops. You know, in the 1960s, there were no chemicals. Every row had to be hoed or gapped 3 times. And but then we started getting mobile harvesters. And this one here, well, it's taking 1 row at a time. Somebody's steering it, and there's a chap driving the tractor. So it's sort of a 3-man job would perhaps get about 1.5 acres a day done. But things have moved on, and today these big roper machines, well, they weigh about 25 ton empty, and they take another 25 ton in the tank, and they take 6 rows up at once, and they're soon whisked over a field. So I said to the driver, well, we get ours taken up by agricultural contractor as well, but not this one. But I said to the one who takes our beet up, what's the most amount you've ever picked in a day? He thought for a moment, and he said 62 acres. That's the most he'd harvested in a day. Admittedly, he says it was in a 100-acre field, and we'd already got the field opened up. I said, what if you were on 15-acre fields? Oh, he said, I'd probably only get 25 acre done. He said, there's all that turning and backing up and trying to get straight into the rows. You just can't get on, he said. So now you can see why farmers want big fields. They're a lot more efficient, and that brings the cost down. While you're turning around with any machine, you're still working, but it's not productive work. So yes, bigger fields are the way forward, but unfortunately not the way forward for wildlife. Along came sprayers, and this was only 20 foot wide, and they weren't, the filtration in them wasn't very good, and they used to get block nozzles quite often. And well, all I can say is here, at least he's got his rubber gloves on. And he died about 5 years ago, and his grandson works for me today. Today, sprayers are 24 or even 36 meters wide, and they know where to run because the drill has left a couple of marks that you can see in front of the tractor. Every nozzle's working perfectly. The filtration plant is good, and every bit of the field gets covered. But well, and this spray is a pre-emergent spray. It kills the weeds as they're coming up. They don't, yes, they will, some will come up, but anyway, this was killing pretty well all the weeds before they came up. And then because of all these sprays, we can grow crops like this. And that's what farmers have been trying to do for generations. At last we can do it. But where's the food for the birds? The birds need insects to feed their young. And if there were any insects feeding on the wheat, our sprayman would say, spray the wheat crop, kill those weeds. They're sacking the sap from the wheat crop. So there, that's just unfortunate, isn't it? You see, this is a privet hawk moth, and the privet hawk moth will only lay its eggs on privet or ash saplings. And if there's no privet or ash saplings, the privet hawk moth will not lay any eggs. And this, of course, is the cinnabar moth that goes on ragwort or groundsel. And if there was no ragwort or groundsel, well, there would be no cinnabar moth. Just as simple as that. Because the butterfly, that's what the butterfly needs to lay its eggs on to bring the next generation up. And that's the situation all over the world, really. Yes. Well, even the humble house sparrow, which we know as a grain-eating bird, it needs insects to feed its young. And then there's the yellow wagtail, of course, which, yes, I saw one today on the farm. They come all the way from West Africa, and they're totally insectivorous, and they feed in the fields, running about. No wonder they're declining if insects have declined as much as what I say they have. And then there's the sedge warbler. Well, he also is totally insectivorous, and he wants something to feed his young with. And then the grey partridge. Well, it lays more eggs than any other bird in the world, but yet it's decreasing in number. It will lay up to 22 eggs in one clutch, and the female can sit on them as well, but not any longer. Well, I say not any longer. They are now quite a rare bird. There are still several about in East Anglia, and we've got probably 2 pairs on the farm, but that's all. And then, of course, we get on to the wood pigeon. Ho ho. And it only lays 2 eggs. And it's been increasing this last 20, 30 years. So what's its secret? It only lays 2 eggs. I know it lays more than 1 brood. It perhaps lays 3 or even 4 broods a year. But that's less eggs than what the robin would lay in a year, less eggs than what a blackbird would lay in a year, and so on. And all those birds that I've just mentioned, they need insects to feed their young. The wood pigeon has the ability to go and eat dry food and go to its habitat coach or go. Anyway, it only lays 2 eggs, but it lays 2 or 3 broods, and it lays a white egg. And it lays a white egg because it doesn't need to lay a camouflaged egg. And it takes more energy to lay a camouflaged egg. And that is, if you have hens that lay brown eggs, they will lay less eggs in a year than those that lay white eggs. It doesn't need to lay a camouflaged egg because it sits on the egg when it lays it, and it keeps sitting on the egg, and the next day it sits on, lays the next egg and keeps sitting on it. And so when you go to a wood pigeon's nest, there's one young is slightly bigger than the other because it's 1 day older. So the wood pigeon has the ability to go and eat dry grain, then go for a drink, and its digestive system will get to work to make pigeon milk, which it will regurgitate to its young. It only lays 2 eggs because its digestive system will only work fast enough to provision 1 chick. 2 adults, 2 chicks. But anyway, it's very successful. Those are a few secrets of the wood pigeon. Well, this is not my farm, it's my neighbour's farm. And if everybody farmed like that, well, there wouldn't be much wildlife, would there? Well, these are pheasants in Yorkshire. And these pheasants have been bred to be shot, of course. They haven't been brought up by their parents, and so they're only half sharp. They don't really know what danger is. As you probably know, they get run over. And then there's food for the fox and the badger and the buzzard. And we've even got ravens now in Lincolnshire, breeding in Lincolnshire. I've seen 2 pairs of ravens today. And, well, then we wonder, these reared pheasants provide all these birds and animals with a surplus of food. And anybody that has a surplus of food, any animal that has a surplus of food will increase in numbers. And you only have to look at ourselves to realize that. Well, a dead rabbit in a field to a magpie isn't much good. He can get one eye out. He can't turn it over to get the other eye out. His beak isn't strong enough to get through the skin. But when we've run over one and it's left on the side of the road, there's a meal for the whole family. No wonder the magpies are increasing. And then, well, all these people that I've mentioned, the fox, the badger, the buzzard, the kite, and the magpie, they're all looking out for eggs. And unfortunately, the lapwings, one of those birds that, well, their eggs are taken quite freely, and all the young are as well. No wonder there aren't many lapwings about. Oilseed rape is the best crop for birds. And here, the reed bunting is probably the bird that's benefited most by it. And here's a reed bunting that's singing in the oilseed rape. And he will get 2 broods in it. So that's a good thing. And the next, well, the worst crop we can grow is peas for vining. And when that's peas for vining means peas for freezing. When you buy a frozen packet of peas in the out of the shop, that's produced by one of these machines. And with it going through the green crop, the birds are nesting and the insects are buzzing, and it's just bad news for farming. There's only one worse crop, and that is grass for silage. And you might say, well, there's plenty of wildlife there. Well, there is plenty of wildlife behind, but not the sort of wildlife we want. They're only picking up the bits and pieces that have been shred. So no birds can nest successfully before a crop of silage is taken. Well, the first thing I did was for conservation was to plant a spinney. We didn't want the trees overhanging the roads or the fields, so we planted some bushes around the outside, and by chance, it's made them very cozy. My neighbour saw my spinneys and thought he would like them, and that's the one on the right there. And so he put a couple of spinneys in, and all they are is leylandi and sycamore. And of course, they're not too good for wildlife. The next, well, yes, and then, but when we plant a wood in the fens, we've only got half a wood. We haven't got any bluebells or dog's mercury or anemones, wood anemones. And so I went to a friend of mine out of the fens. We've got a wood where I knew there were a lot of bluebells. We brought some bulbs back, and there we are. We've got them growing in the spinneys now. And it looks quite pretty in a fortnight's time. The next thing I did was to have some wide grass margins. And we planted some teasels in them. The goldfinches like those. The barn owls like the wide grass margins, and so do the reed buntings and whitethroats. So they're quite a good thing, but not as good as those with flowers in. And so after a couple of years, we planted wildflower strips. This is 20 meters wide. We got a ministry grant for it, but 20 meters wide, and run right across the field. lady's bed straw, muskmallow, and various other hedge bed straw. It's quite a sight, and it's quite a buzz when on a summer's day. Another thing we do is to have cultivated margins where we don't actually spray anything. We just cultivate and let the weeds grow. And in this plot here, there were 58 different varieties of food for the birds. So that's they're pretty good. Then we have skylark plots. Well, a skylark likes to run into its nest, and they like to alight in the tram lines. You can see, if you can see my cursor, alight there, run uphill, and these skylark plots. Well, if the skylark lands in a plot and runs, it can then run to its nest, run across the open ground to its nest. That's all right. But the mammals use the tram lines, and they can see and they can hear and they can smell. And so perhaps quite a lot of them that nest in the tram lines get predated. But I'm the only one in the village who has these plots, but they pay quite well. We also grow crops for the birds, and these are linnets above some kale plots. And here we are with the combine harvesting organic oats. And on the very left of the photo, you can see the weeds in the crops. But not a lot of those weeds, some of those weeds aren't very good for the birds, and we tend to have to wait a bit to be, you could say, to be let out. We have to sorry, we have the weeds in the crops are not as good as I thought they would be. In fact, organic farming hasn't brought the wildlife back like I thought it would do. This is a cultivated margin, a crop of sunflowers on the right and a hedge on the left of several different species. You can see a bramble there growing out. There's dogwood, there's blackthorn, there's hawthorn, there's dog rose, and there's a bit of everything in there. And that hedge, and there's a dike by the hedge, it's full of wildlife, I can assure you. Well, first thing to come into flower in the countryside actually is the hazel, but it's not really a flower. It dangles its flower heads, which are green. The pollen blows from it, and the pollen is taken by the wind. The next one is the blackthorn, and then comes the hawthorn, which is this one. Got quite a lot of honey in hawthorn. And after that would come the dog rose or the dogwood. Can't remember which comes first, but then of course the bramble comes after that. And there's a lot of nectar in bramble. And this peacock butterfly is sipping nectar from the flowers. Butterflies, of course, don't eat anything. They just sip nectar. And it's their job to mate and lay the eggs. And when that's happened, that's them finished, really. So butterflies are amazing creatures. The tortoiseshell and the peacock, they overwinter as adults. There's some butterfly caterpillars overwinter as caterpillars. Some overwinter as eggs, and it's an amazing situation. The caterpillars are there only to eat. They don't have anything to. They don't eat anything really. Sorry, they they're there just to eat. There's no boy or no girl in a caterpillar. And when they hatch out to a butterfly, there's either a boy or girl, and their job is just to mate. And when they've done that, that's about it. They only last for 10 days or a fortnight. Isn't nature marvelous? Last of all, of course, comes the ivy. And there's only one thing wrong with ivy, and that's that people don't like it. It's the best food and best shelter in the winter for birds. And that's another one of my neighbours, Dykes again, and he's mown it, this 6-metre margins, which are in countryside stewardship, to suit himself. He hasn't even got the wheat harvested in the right hand of the photo there. So he doesn't farm very well for wildlife. And the whitethroat likes to nest in areas that weren't cut the year before, so he won't be able to find anywhere to nest on my neighbour's farm. But I leave these outsides of fields, and we don't mow unless it's absolutely necessary, and so we get more wildlife and have less cost. And if we look at this, well, the green areas are the areas where I farm, the green hashed areas. The black dots are singing whitethroats, and I survey all the land within the orange boundary. And most of the whitethroats, as you can see, are on my farm. But there's one place that stands out, and that's the one on the right, just under the Deeping St. Nicholas sign. That man, he's wanted to do some fish farming. So he started, he dug some ponds and planted some bushes for a bit of shelter, but the fish farming never really worked out. And so he's gone back to normal farming, but the habitat remains, and there's more birds in that habitat than there is in any other habitat roundabout. And I've copied it about 5 times from him. So that's the whitethroat. Well, now they've actually taken to oilseed rape, so that's a good thing. But they're lovely little birds. Well, this is a barn that's fell into disrepair. A strong wind got in through the door and blew this nail out, blew that end of the shed out. I have a barn owl box in there, and I just wonder when the owner is going to think, well, it looks a mess, it's time I pulled it down. But he hasn't yet. So I've built some brick owl towers for the barn owls, and in that brick owl tower, I can some years I have 6 species nesting. There's 2 nest holes each side, and the bottom on this end, it may be taken up with a mallard nesting there, and they tumble out in late March. And then the top one might have a barn owl in it. There's 2 the other side. They might be stock dove and kestrel. And when they've flown, well, the tree sparrow boxes, you can see 1 under the owl tower there and 10 more down the side of the pond. So we got paid by DEFRA to dig the ponds. We got paid to make the bird seed and sow it. We got paid for the planting the hedge, and we get paid for not cutting it too much. We've laid it, so we've collected up all the plastic spirals. And you see, a hedge with its tree guard on is not much good. It doesn't offer any shelter hardly at all in the winter. But if you have 2 hedges, only 10 yards apart or less than that, you get a lot of shade. and people like to come where it is shady, of course, and in most places in the fens there isn't much shade at all. Well, my neighbour's barn, it looked like it might be falling down, and so I have a barn owl box in there. And so I said to him, I said, look, if I could get you a 50% grant, would you re-roof that barn? You see, the wind turbines give £10,000 to the village each year. And I thought if I could tap into a bit of that money, I might get the roof re-roofed. So I happened to be on the wind turbine committee, and I got him a 60% grant. And so that has been re-roofed now. And the barn to the left of that, that's also had the same treatment. So everything's going quite well for the barn owl. But it's not just nesting sites is the problem, it's the amount of food there is about. The voles. The voles don't like wet and windy weather. For some reason or other, it the wet weather stops the voles breeding. And those 2 wet years we had 2 years ago, well, the barn owls struggled. They only reared about half a chick per per nest. Some didn't rear any at all. And this year, well, we've had a brood of 6, not a brood of 7, but it needs a lot of voles about so they can have a good brood like this. And where these ponds are, well, the ponds and the hedges and the wildflowers, there's the maximum amount of insects that I think I can make in any one place. And this, of course, is a reed bunting taking its flowers, its insects that is found to its young. I've got a reservoir with an island in it, and common terns breed on that island. And we have made a wetland, and on this wetland we have mallard, tufted, gadwall and shoveler nesting. We have redshanks, they rear young. We have lapwings, and we have oyster catchers that rear young. It's really a really good thing to see it all going on. Well, tree sparrows, we've been, of course, built up a bit of a reputation for tree sparrows. The first ones really that I noticed on the farm were nesting in an old carrion crow's nest. No, not an old carrion crow's nest. They were nesting in an active carrion crow's nest. They were nesting in the base of the nest. But we put some feeders up, and after a year or two, they increased. And they would, well, there was 90, let's see, no, there's seven feeders, 6 on each feeder. So that's 6, 7, 42. But anyway, they still kept increasing, the tree sparrows did. And so I put more feeders up, and you'll see there's an insect on each quart of each feeder. And they kept increasing, so we put more feeders up. And there's still more birds waiting down below and back in the bushes. But anyway, we thought that's time we gave a bit back to the RSPB, and so we've been in touch with them and about rearing tree sparrows, but they haven't come back to me about wanting any. So tree sparrows are quite easy as long as you've got the habitat, and I suppose the linnets are the same really. They will, well, as the tree sparrows, they will come and feed communally. The linnets will go a mile to take. They have the ability to go and take food for their young a mile. That is because when they get to the nest, they feed on unripe seeds, and store the seeds in their gullet. And when they get to the nest, they feed all 5 youngsters in one visit. And of course, a blackbird or a blue tit, it only takes enough in its beak to produce, to give to 1 youngster. And so they can't afford to get very far from the nest, but the linnet can. So we've, I don't think we've actually increased the linnets, but certainly they do like our food. And then there's the yellowhammer. Well, he has a territory and he doesn't want any other male in his territory. But you never know. He might be, because he sings all summer, and he might have been singing to attract another mate, as does the corn bunting. In fact, the corn bunting sings all day and all evening for another mate. If he'd only, and he doesn't take any part in the nesting ceremony, doesn't help build the eggs, doesn't help build the nest and look after tidy the nest up and sit on the eggs, lets the female do it all. And if he'd only buckle down and help the female, well, they might not be decreasing as fast as they were before. Well, that's my sister's garden in Scotland, herbaceous garden. She's got sweet williams there. She's got hollyhocks. She's got delphiniums and lupins and various other plants. But most of us have gone for evergreen shrubs. My wife certainly has. And these shrubs have come without their insects. They're not native. Most of them are not native to the British Isles. They come without their insects. And we wonder where the spotted flycatchers got to, because we don't have so many flowers in our gardens. And if I was a bird, I wouldn't know where to nest in this garden. But not every garden is like that, but there are some gardens that are like that. And then there's this one. Well, maybe he was trying to get a ring plover to nest in the garden. But I doubt it. Well, I like feeding birds, and this is when I was feeding oilseed rape. And there's 104 goldfinches there, 33 greenfinches, 3 chaffinches, and 2 linnets. It's not necessary to feed the birds every day, but if you do feed them every day, when the snow comes, you will get more birds. And it was about this time when 2 of my daughters had a cat each, and the cats used to hide in this bush at the back there, and I put that fence up, and that stopped them. Yes, that was a good exercise done. And yeah, we sell a lot of bird seed when it's snowing, of course, but the most bird food we sell is in May and June. And then if any of you think you should stop feeding in May or June, well, that's wrong, because we sell more bird food in May and June than any other month, because all the harvest is eaten up, and there's nothing coming forward in May and June. But July is quite different. There is. But if you want to do something for your birds in your garden, you should feed them live mealworms. Every bird has to take its young moist food, and that moist food is insects usually. And so by using that little, so if RSPB studies have shown that if you feed live mealworms in your gardens in April, May, and June, you will rear 50% more birds in your garden. And if we want to see a lot of birds, we have to breed a lot of birds. So live mealworms, the kiddie, dried mealworms, not much good. Well, that was the drain at the bottom of my farm before 1980. And I didn't like the idea that it was cut twice a year. As soon as everything got about 2 foot high, they would cut it again. And so I got myself elected onto the drainage board. And at that drainage board meeting, the second one I attended, I asked them if there was any necessity to cut our main drains twice a year. They said there was, but I did persuade them to only cut it once a year. And as the chairman went out of the meeting, he said to the vice chairman, so the vice chairman told me a few years later, he said, "Do you know," he said, "I think we're going to have some trouble from this chap." But I haven't caused them any trouble because I've saved them money. And 3 or 4 years after we decided to only mow it once a year, I said to the engineer, "Why don't we only mow it one side each year?" And so now we've got, this is the scene at this time of year. The reeds have just started to grow, and we have a wildlife corridor from this bridge, well, right up to the next bridge, 2,800 yards away. And I can find 70 reed warblers in that, between those two bridges, in 2,800 yards, one every 70 yards. No, one every 40 yards, that's it, yeah. We do also mow the smaller drains one side each year, saves the drains board money, and they can get over the job faster. And there is a reed warbler that, and of course, reed warblers are one of the only 2 species or so that don't actually rest their nest on anything. They they twine the nesting material around the stems, and they sway about in the reeds as the wind blows. Well, they have their problems, and this, of course, is a cuckoo's egg, and that might be the scene one week, and the next reason this might be the scene. The little cuckoo, when it's only 1 day old, has thrown the birds out of the nest. And it's well equipped to do so. It's got a dimple in its back, as you can see. But it wasn't that did it. It was the fact that we've got money. And sorry, it wasn't. It wasn't. Yeah, sorry. The cuckoo here is about 8 days old, and it didn't do it the day when it was 7 days old. It did it when it was 1 day old. And here is a young cuckoo with a reed warbler's nest on its egg on its back, climbing up the nest backwards. And the cuckoo, of course, is blind. He's got his little wings outstretched to keep the egg on its back. And, well, isn't that amazing? And how long would it take to evolve all this? Well, Nick Davis from Cambridge University, he reckons it took 100,000 years to evolve. Just amazing, isn't it? And, well, plop, the egg falls in the water. And at that, the little bird is exhausted. It flops back into the nest and keeps asking for any food if it can hear the parents coming. 10 days later, well, that's how it is. And then by this time, its parents are on the way to Africa. But the young cuckoo has to wait another 30 days or so before it's strong enough to fly far. They go down to the Po Valley and fatten up there. And they also, a few go via Gibraltar, but most go via the Po Valley. And they have better success in getting down to Africa if they go down the Po Valley way. And they fatten up in the Po Valley, and the next hop is across the Mediterranean and the Sahara in one flight. Well, that's a fair step, isn't it? Isn't nature marvelous? And of course, the young cuckoo will never see its parents. And a lot of them go down via Italy, come back via Gibraltar, along the African coast. Just amazing, isn't it? And we could do that now that we have a sat nav. But of course, The cuckoo in my lifetime has gone from surplus to scarcity, and it continues to decline. We must look after it. Wildlife is amazing, and we must tell others how amazing it is for them to look after it as well. Well, you might say, well, is there anyone to follow on? Well, there is. Here he is, 8 years old, driving a D2 crawler. And that's my grandson, because I only have 3 daughters. And then here he is. He's keen on wildlife as well. How many of you have had a swan in your arms at 9 years old? He loves it. Any questions?
Right. Okay, well, first of all, let me bring us all back in. And if you stop your screen share, there we go. Lovely. Thank you, Nicholas. That was just absolutely fascinating. And, you know, I've certainly learned a lot from what you've been saying over the last hour or so. And I'm sure that people watching have learned as well. So let's have a look and see if there's any questions in the chat. Got a few people saying hello. Richard Chu has said, huge credit to you, Nicholas, for your enlightening and inspiring approach to farming. It just shows what can be achieved. I hope others follow your example. It has never been so important for our farming and wildlife. Jan Lewis has said, brilliant talk, Nicholas, truly inspirational. There is so much about farming I had not appreciated. How can we persuade more farmers to be like you? So sorry, I'll just come back there. I was going to ask the same thing, actually. My question was going to be very similar to Jan's. Are other farmers doing this, and are enough of them doing this, which I would suspect the answer is no. And if you get paid for doing parts of the conservation work that you've been doing, why aren't more farmers doing it, do you think?
Well, it is because they're not interested. You see, there's 1.2 million members with the RSPB. There's 800,000 members of the Wildlife Trust. There's the Dragonfly Society, the Butterfly Conservation Group, and there's the other groups. That brings it up to about 2.5 million people. But the trouble is, half those people are members of both of those, or 2 of those societies. So that brings it down to 1.25 million people. Mm. But then the RSPB and the Wildlife Trust, they actually admit that half of their members are couch members. They are members, but they don't do anything. And it's a good job they are members, because it's more money in the coffers of the Wildlife Trust and the RSPB. So that brings it down to 1% of the population that's interested in wildlife. Mm. Okay, perhaps there's 2% of farmers interested in wildlife that would really do things. Unfortunately, 1 or 2% of us are not going to bring wildlife back, are we?
Just not enough. So what's the answer? I mean, in an ideal world, you know, I'd love to be able to show every farmer what you've just said over the last hour, and I'm sure you could talk for many, many more hours about the subject, and make them do it. But how do we get there? I mean, if they're not interested, how can we get there? Is there any chance of anything changing, do you think, in the near future?
Well, it's trying to show people how amazing wildlife is, isn't it? But you know, well, I'm just fortunate that I'm a farmer who's interested in wildlife, and I like counting birds, and most other farmers like counting money. But you know, it's just sad. It's a sad state of affairs that we haven't got more people interested.
Absolutely. I mean, it really does show through your passion for the wildlife and for the birds, and what you've done is absolutely 100% commendable. It's fantastic. Right, so we've got some more comments. Paul Daltrey has said, what an absolutely fascinating presentation from a master storyteller. Richard Chu again has asked, do you think that there is any chance of the reintroduced Neen ooze washes corncrakes finding their way to you? Is there any suitable habitat on your farm for corncrakes?
Well, I believe haven't they stopped breeding the corncrakes on the Neen washes?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the status is
But
at the moment, to be fair.
we have no, we haven't really got any suitable habitat. There is a nature reserve next to us, the Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust, where they've got the cranes breeding, but we haven't really got enough grassland. Our wetland, we keep it fairly short in the spring because for the lapwings and the oyster catchers. And admittedly, it does grow up, and we don't know it, but we haven't heard any corncrakes calling.
Okay. Colin Underhill said your farm is an oasis in a desert, and I think
I'm afraid it is.
Yeah, it literally looks like that from the overhead view. Richard, again, what are your views on the government's proposed ELMS, which is the Environmental Land Management System scheme, following the UK leaving the EU cap?
Well, it's 4 or 5 years ago, it was almost as if the government didn't want people who were in their government schemes. They were a year late paying us, and if they visited us and they found that we weren't complying with the rules, they would give us a hefty fine. And it was a job to get into these schemes, but now the government seems to have changed its outlook on this thing. They've been listening to us, what we've been telling them, and the ELMS scheme really has got quite a lot to offer for farmers. And okay. Yeah, we're going to stop our stewardship scheme early to go into the ELMS scheme because it's more beneficial. The payments are better, and yes, it's quite good. It should attract more farmers to do a bit for wildlife.
That would be great if it does. That really would. Sarah Henson Webb has said, "Can we come and visit your farm, Nicholas?"
Well, yes, of course we can. We have. We don't let people just roam all over because it's a bit of a scattered farm in a way, but we have groups come round, and we gladly show a group of you around. Yes.
Okay, and is this something? How would we contact? Is it something that's advertised on your website, or would we contact you directly for that? Or
well, it's you can contact us on the website or make an inquiry by email, and then we'll get a date that suits both, and yeah, come along. Okay.
That could be a future field trip, maybe. I think we'd have a lot of members that would be interested in coming and having a look. John Peacock said, "Fascinating presentation, Nicholas, so informative." And Chris Bolchin said, "Brilliant presentation. Where do you stand on neonicotinoids?" I hope I said that right.
Neonicotinoids. Yeah. Yes. Well, we are growing sugar beet this year without them. It's a bit of a gamble. It's the green fly that the neonicotinoids control. These chemicals that we're using they're powerful stuff. And oilseed, you know how small an oilseed rapeseed is. Well, and if we coat the oilseed rapeseed with a neonicotinoid, it will keep the flea beetle away for the whole year that it's growing. Just amazing. But without that that cover, we've had to plough 30 acres of oilseed rape up because we are the flea beetle has devastated the crop. So where do we stand? Well, we're not allowed to use it on oilseed rape. The only thing we can use it on is sugar beet. If the sugar beet British Sugar gets a derogation for us to use it, it has actually cost farmers millions of pounds, but with us not being allowed to use it. Okay. And anyway, we've taken the gamble this year not to use it on our sugar beet.
Okay.
But we are allowed to use it this year.
Okay. And a couple more questions just from me, really. The oil radish, is that actually beneficial to the soil as well for the crop the following year? Does it enrich and everything?
Yes, it's as a soil improver. The root of the oil radish goes down and makes the drainage hole. It's a soil improver. We don't get any money from sowing it. The seed costs, of course, and actually you see it around the countryside. But the frost this year have killed it all off.
Right.
But in other years, we've seen it around the countryside through the winter. But very few people just around me have taken it up at all. But
Okay.
yes, it's the only good thing I've known in farming in all my life. Yeah.
Okay. And final comment from Kathy Hoskins has said, thanks so much, Nicholas. This was thought-provoking and insightful explanation of many things that went wrong in farming. And I think, yeah, I mean, it's been over the years, machinery and trying to maximize the yield from the land and so on and so forth. And as you said throughout your talk, that's not beneficial to wildlife. So I just, once again, just want to commend you for the job you've done and will continue to do. Just brilliant.
Thank you.